Hola, buenas noches a todos y a todas.
Hello, thank you so much for
Gracias
inviting
por la
me here tonight
invitación.
to
Mi
speak. I will
intervención
be
será en
speaking in
español
Spanish
para tener
because that's
más
how I better
impacto en la
communicate.
comunicación.
A
Particular
special thank you to everyone from
a
Justice
los
Oil
compañeros y las
and to those of
compañeras
you
de
who are joining us
Justice
here
Oil.
today from the other
Bueno,
side
para
of your
comenzar con el
screens. Since I
tema
arrived
del que
here
iba a
in
hablar
Europe
en
4 years
estos
ago,
minutos,
I realized the
pues
force with
quisiera
which alarms
comenzar
are being set
diciendo
off around a
que
particular
desde hace
topic, a
4 años
topic which
estoy
almost
aquí en
everyone is
Urbanitas
talking
Tierras.
about,
Me di
that topic
cuenta
being
de
the
la
climate
fuerza
crisis.
con la que
Civil
ha
society,
emergido la
academia,
sociedad
the
civil,
scientific
la
community,
academia, la
intellectuals,
comunidad
environmentalists,
científica, los
activists, and the
intelectuales,
media
los
all talk about the
ambientalistas,
climate
los
crisis that is before
activistas,
us,
los
because it
medios de
represents the
comunicación
greatest threat that we have
hablan
ever
sobre esa
faced in our
crisis
entire
que
history.
tenemos al frente
It is a
porque
topic that
representa
has
la amenaza
become
más grande
the
que hayamos
topic of
tenido en toda
today.
nuestra
And in
historia.
all
Es
scenarios
como
where it
un
is spoken
tema
about, there
que
is
se
always
convirtió en
talk
el
of
tema de
a
la
global
actualidad
climate crisis,
y en
the
todos
collapse of
los
humanity,
escenarios donde
the
he
fall
tenido
of
la oportunidad de
civilization,
estar se habla de
and a
la
number of
crisis
other
climática
definitions that
global,
always refer
se
to
habla del
all of the human
colapso de la
family and
humanidad, se habla
mankind
del
as a whole, and
otoño
to a
de
global
la
crisis.
civilización. Sin embargo,
However, when we
cuando uno
analyze things
analiza
from the
desde una
perspective of someone
perspectiva
from the global south,
sureña como
like
la mía,
mine,
este
this is a
momento
historical
histórico
moment,
y sobre todo la
especially
manera como
because
se
of the
está
way in which
abordando,
things are being
uno
approached.
se da cuenta de una
And one
realidad
becomes aware of the
que desde mi
reality
perspectiva se
that
puede
can be defined in
resumir en
2
dos
points.
puntos.
Firstly,
El
one
primero
realizes that
es
a
que
rather
uno se da
superficial
cuenta
narrative is presented in regards to
que
the
se le está dando una lectura bastante
climate crisis,
superficial
since it's from
a
its
esta crisis
since it's from
climática,
its roots
ya que
and
no
foundations
está
are
siendo
not being considered.
considerada desde sus
By
raíces,
this, what I
desde
mean to
sus
say is that the climate
fundamentos.
crisis is
Y
being
con
thought
esto
of
quiero decir
only as a
que esta
cause,
crisis
such as a cause
climática
of
está
global
siendo
warming, and
pensada
what it can provoke.
únicamente
This
como
is why the
una
alarms are going
causa,
off.
como
It
la
is not being considered
causante
as a
del
consequence,
calentamiento global
as the
y de lo que
consequence
puede
of something
provocar.
else,
Y
the
es por eso que
consequence
las
of a
alarmas están
society
prendidas.
designed by the global
Y
north,
no está siendo
essentially a
considerada como
colonial
una
model that
consecuencia,
began
es decir, como la
530 years ago
consecuencia de
and
algo,
has been
la
dependent on,
consecuencia de un
to this
modelo de
day, on the
sociedad
theft,
de los países
looting,
del
and
norte global,
pillaging of the
un modelo
resources of countries from the
esencialmente
global south
colonial
in order to
que
guarantee
empezó hace
progress for the
530
countries of
años
the north.
y que ha
At its
dependido
roots,
hasta el
it is
día de
that
hoy
model of
del
society,
robo, del
that
saqueo, del
logic,
pillaje
being
de
globally
los
imposed
recursos de
and
los
forced from
países
Europe,
del sur global
that running of
para
the world through a
garantizar
totally
la vida
unequal
normal
and
y el
unfair
progreso de
power
los países
dynamic
del
that
norte.
is responsible for the climate
El
crisis
fondo
in which we find
es
ourselves today.
ese modelo de
We
sociedad que
must not
olvidar
forget
que
Europe could only hold
Europa
power
pudo ser
only
la
and thanks to the
potencia
robbery and looting of
únicamente
South America from the
gracias al
16th
robo y
century
al
and of the
saqueo de
African
América del
continent
Sur
from the middle
a
of the
partir del
18th
siglo
century
XVI
until
y
today.
del continente
Without the
africano desde la
colonization of
mitad del
Africa and
siglo
the Americas,
XVIII hasta
Europe
hoy
would
presente.
perhaps still be
Sin esa
stuck in the Middle Ages
colonización.
today.
Y el segundo
Secondly,
punto
from a Southern
es
perspective,
que
one
desde esa
realizes that the
perspectiva
reason
sureña uno
alarm
se da
bells are
cuenta
going
que
off
si
in the
las
world right
alarmas
now
están
is
prendidas en el
actually
mundo en este
because of
momento
Europe and the
es
world
en
powers being
realidad
overwhelmed by the
porque
very
Europa y las
Frankenstein they
potencias del
created,
mundo
which they
están
can no longer
siendo
control. The alarms
sobrepasadas
are going
por
off
ese
because Europe
Frankenstein que
and
ellas
the
mismas
colonizing
crearon y
powers
que se
are
les
feeling
salió de
vulnerable
control.
and threatened by the
Las
consequences of this
alarmas
colonial,
están
capitalist,
prendidas
and
porque
neoliberal model
Europa y
that they
las
created,
potencias
which, in order to
colonizadoras se
function,
están
must
sintiendo
destroy Mother Earth
vulnerables
and
y
exploit her
amenazadas
inhabitants.
porque si hay
Because
algo
if there is
seguro
something for
acá
certain
es
here,
que
it is that if this climate
si esta
crisis
crisis
were only
climática
affecting the
fuera a
African continent,
afectar
for
únicamente
example,
al
it is
continente
almost
africano, por
certain
ejemplo,
that the world's
muy
alarms would not
seguramente
be
las
going
alarmas
off
del
as they
mundo no
are today.
estarían prendidas
The
como
same would
están en este
happen if the
momento.
climate crisis were
Y
only to
pasaría
affect Latin
igualmente
America
si
or
fuera a afectar
Southwest Asia.
únicamente a América
As
Latina
sad
o
as
al
it is to
sudeste
say,
asiático.
the only
Y
reason
es
the alarm is
verdaderamente
going off
triste
today in the
decirlo, pero es
way in
así.
which it
Si las
is
alarmas
because
están
the
prendidas
integrity of
hoy
the
de esa
European
manera,
being
es
is
porque la
threatened.
integridad
And I dare
del
say
ser
this
europeo se está
because
viendo
for more
amenazada.
than
Y me atrevo a
530
decir
years,
esto
indigenous
porque desde hace
people,
más de
the Black
530
community,
años,
and peasant
tanto los pueblos
communities from the global
indígenas
south
como las
have been
comunidades
constantly
negras y
fighting
campesinas
against the
del
root
sur global
causes that have
han
led to this
estado
climate
luchando
crisis. That being
incesantemente
against
contra las
exploitation,
razones
looting, and
que
the destruction
provocaron
of their
esta crisis
territories
climática,
by the
es
countries
decir,
and
contra la
multinationals
explotación,
of the
contra el
global north.
saqueo y la destrucción de los
Against that
territorios por
colonial
parte de los
logic of
países
the
del
world
norte y
imposed by
las
Europe that I
multinacionales del
already
norte
spoke
global.
about. A
Contra esa
fight that has
lógica
left
colonial
millions of dead
impuesta por el
among
Europa de
men,
la que ya hablé,
women, in children, grandfathers, and grandmothers, people that nobody in the world cared for, who did not deserve the alarms were set off in their names, people who for more than 5 centuries had been screaming at the top of their lungs that Mother Earth must be protected, that it is not the time to destroy her, and that we must take care of her. People whom nobody wanted to listen to, and only do so now because Europe has felt the consequences of their way of being. In these moments, that the European being is seeing itself vulnerable in the face of the consequences of that colonial logic, now the alarms are on. This inevitably reflects, even today in 2023, the hierarchy of humanity invented in Europe and turned into a social reality. This racial hierarchy where some are more important than others, where there are some who deserve to be mourned and others who do not. To wrap up, I have a question that arises to me, and it is this. Why is it that only now, when Europe feels vulnerable in the face of the climate crisis, did people start talking about the importance of protecting the global south, and not before, when we were being murdered by the millions? Finally, after this brief introduction, it can be concluded that 1. In the global south, they have been fighting for more than 5 centuries against the causes of the climate crisis, and nobody cared. And in the global north, they have been fighting for a couple of years against the consequences of the climate crisis, and the whole world is in panic. 2. We are not experiencing a climate crisis, but a colonial crisis made by a few countries that are making the whole world pay for their brutality. It is not a global crisis, but a crisis of the countries that call themselves world powers that are actually today's colonizers under a different name. 4. The alarms are only going off now because the European being is feeling vulnerable, and that is a sample of the racial crisis that humanity is stuck in, where some human beings are more important than others. 5. Today, both in the global north and south, we are fighting against the same enemy, this colonial, capitalist, neoliberal system. And the time has come to listen to those who have been fighting against it for more than 5 centuries. Surely the answer lies there. And finally, 6. The first step is to accept that the European monologue is over and the time for dialogue has arrived. Thank you.
Aceptar que el monólogo europeo terminó y que llegó el momento del diálogo. Muchas gracias.
Juan, muchas gracias. Tengo una pregunta. We had a couple of questions coming in. How can we work together to best build true solidarity? That is the question.
Bueno,
So essentially, that the key thing is to accept that these systems exist, these patriarchal, Eurocentric systems that exist, and accepting their failings. And once we accept these failings, we will become more open and willing to see the other options that are out there and to listen to the voices of those who are being oppressed by these systems. So, because when we see these crises that we're facing, social crises, economic crises, they're all a direct result of these systems. Yeah. So when we see these failings that are a result of this system, it opens up our eyes to the necessity for this change, that and for us to see things with new eyes in which we're not seeing things, from which we're not seeing things at this point in time. Yeah. So looking at things from a horizontal glance, not hierarchical, the way that we have been seeing things, like was said at the end, the European monologue is over, it's time for dialogue. Europe has been used to pointing a finger and people following, and the time for that is over.
Y el mundo lo seguía, pero eso ya cambió.
Yeah, so it's not about lecturing people, it's about saying that it's about accepting that this section is over, this monologue is over, and it's this time for a collective dialogue.
Por fin, el momento de un diálogo.